Ken has been a type 2 diabetic since 1999. He's a qualified psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, executive coach, and mentor. He specialises in emotional problems with people living with long term conditions and their carers, for example, diabetes, cancer, those that suffer from stress, anxiety, or depression. He also organises and runs a type 2 diabetic peer support group in Bromley in Kent. The main area is now diabetes advocacy, helping people and companies understand what it is like to live with diabetes. He helps those with emotional problems and gives talks on that to people that diabetes endures. He's also passionate about ending the stigma around diabetes, especially those of us living with type 2. Helga is a diabetes advocate and wellbeing coach living in South Africa. She describes her most empowering day as the one she disclosed her type 2 diabetes diagnosis to others, having hidden it for many years. Since then, she's not only found her voice for advocacy, but a community of support too. Helga has a special interest in type 2 diabetes, patient integrated support and education. And finally, Mark was diagnosed in 1996 in Melbourne, in Australia, at the age of 35 and was originally diagnosed as type 1. He struggled with managing his diabetes for a long time, but with the help of peer support and using CGM in 2019, things got better. Mark wants to help others living with type 2 and widen the availability of tech for people with type 2 diabetes, particularly, and is an advocate in ending diabetes stigma. Can I just say an official welcome to you all? And I hope you're all okay.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. Although some of it's a bit old hat, but never mind.
I think I got it from the last time you were on, Ken.
Yeah, probably. It's over a year ago. Or it's actually just about a year. Next week would have been a year. But when I was in hospital at the time.
Yes, I remember that. I remember you being in hospital. And as I'm type 2, I'll give you a little bit of info on me. I was diagnosed in 1995 at the age of 22. I got pregnant at 25, but was already on insulin, not being able to tolerate metformin and any other medications weren't working. I went virtually straight onto insulin. Um, and up till 2 years ago, I didn't have a CGM. But my first evening listening to Diabetes Chat, I actually listened to somebody talking about CGM and managed to then speak to my team and get them prescribed for me. And it has been a godsend since. So before we start, to help raise awareness for the people that don't know, can you tell the community what is type 2 diabetes? I don't know which of you wants to answer that. Ken, do you want to?
I suppose I better. Seemed I'm first on the list. Type 2 diabetes. Some people call it the easy diabetes, but there's no such thing as the easy diabetes. It's basically where your insulin, it's insulin resistant, is what is terminally called, or technically called, where we originally probably produce a lot of insulin, but it doesn't actually get into where it's supposed to go. Whereas type 1 is an autoimmune disease where the little body decides that it's going to kill off all insulin. So that's the sort of easy way of describing diabetes mellitus, which is both type 1 and type 2. Basically that's about it. Sometimes type 1 have to be more on, or well, are always on insulin, no matter whether they like it or not. Type 2 can be on insulin and also various other medications now. I think NICE has something got about 9 different medications that we can all try, from diet and exercise to the baddie insulin, as some people like to call it. Although I hate that idea. I don't know. Helga, would you like to see your next on the list?
Is there anything else you want to add, Helga? I don't think she has. Mark, have you got anything else to add?
Not really. I mean, for me, because I was originally misdiagnosed as type 1, they put me straight on insulin. So they did also, after I moved to the UK in 2000, they tried to put me on metformin, but like you, I do not tolerate it at all, or really any of the other drugs they wanted to try me on. Did try me on. I didn't stay anything on anything for more than a month. There was a downside to my misdiagnosis, though, I've got to say, and that is that when I was in hospital, because they took me into hospital for 3 days, got my levels down, and taught me to inject. And they said, oh, by the way, you're going to have this for the rest of your life, and it's probably going to get worse.
Not the best thing to hear when you've just been diagnosed, is it?
No, it wasn't. And I've got to say, look, I suffered from diabetic burnout for a long time. I mean, burnout's a subject we'll probably get onto later. And part of that, I am certain, was the fact that I was effectively told you have no hope of getting better or changing it. So, yeah, it was not a good thing to hear when you got diagnosed.
No, can you imagine that wasn't?
Yeah. But eventually I learnt, and I learnt better, and I improved things. But that took close to 25 years to do. But yeah, it's been so far 29 years, but I'm in a much better place than I was. And the thing, one of the misconceptions about type 2 is that it is a lifestyle disease. I mean, I have lost count of how many times it's been said to me, oh, you're type 2, oh, if you just, exercise a bit more and eat a bit less, you'll be fine. And what I think, even if I don't say anything, is if it was that simple, don't you think I would have done it?
Well, yeah. I get much the same as what you're saying,
Yeah.
Mark.
And one of the things I'm passionate about as an advocate is getting better care for type 2s. The type 1 community are to be applauded for the fantastic job they have done on advocating and improving care for type 1s. And we need to do the same thing for type 2s, and events like tonight are a great start in that, because we have to get type 2s talking about their condition. We have to move the conversation into the public sphere so that the politicians will take notice and they will fund things better. Now, I recently saw, as in this week, that there's an all cross-party parliamentary group around diabetes has just been reformed after several years. So there is interest in Parliament, and there is a group of people who are prepared to, parliamentarians who are prepared to do something about this. So I would urge anybody who listens to this to talk to their member of Parliament and get them to learn more about diabetes. Heck, book a half-hour time slot with your MP, and explain to him about your condition and why you think there needs to be better care taken for type 2s. They will listen, particularly if they're one of the new politicians from the Labor Party who only recently got in. They are wanting to improve their profile among their constituents, so there are a really good chance of getting them to listen to you and hopefully get them to support improved quality of care. Sorry, I've gotten on my soapbox.
That's okay, Mark. That sounds a brilliant idea, and I hadn't actually thought of that till you mentioned it. So yes, I will get onto my MP, especially at the moment while I'm not working, so I can go to these appointments.
Yep.
So, Helga, have you got anything to add to what is type 2 diabetes?
Look, I think, for me, I think I think Mark and Ken have covered it, but I think for me, what really through the last 3 years particularly has been highlighted is the lack of understanding around type 2 diabetes. And so I use really simple analogies, like spilling sugar on the floor and having a broom with really worn out bristles and the broom not being able to pick up all the sugar that's been spilled up off the floor. Because I think that many people just don't, if it doesn't affect you, there doesn't seem to be an interest or interest. And I think that there's still a misconception that it only impacts on older people, like your gran. So my gran had type 2 diabetes, but it's referred to as in Dutch or Afrikaans they call it suikerziekte, so sugar sickness. So these are the kind of narratives that one deals with within, like, your family or your internal community, and in terms of the conversations around it. So not so much in terms of defining the differences, but more so in terms of what is the understanding of it. And when I was first diagnosed, it was gestational diabetes, and I mean, sure, that was a trip. Yeah, I was in utter shock, and it was, if you at the end of your pregnancy to be diagnosed and then have to take, and that's actually clear when I started taking for the first time, took insulin, and during that process, it didn't, I had the best doctors, but I just didn't feel supported in it. And I suppose hence me not speaking about it. The 4 people that knew about it was like literally the endocrinologist, the nutritionist, the dietitian, my husband, and the gynecologist. Because it just felt like you were doing all the working all the time. Because if I think of this last 2 years, I've had to think about it in retrospect, that the onus only rested with you. So from the time of diagnosis, it just felt like all that responsibility was on you, and you had placed yourself in that position. And you could.
Yeah, I found that as well.
Did you find that as well?
When I was diagnosed, and I had no support up till I joined Diabetes Chat, other than the short time in the year that I actually spent with my healthcare team, be it whether it was my diabetes nurse or the consultant.
Yeah.
One of the comments I'd make here is that every advocate that I know has become an advocate because the first person they've had to advocate for is themselves.
That's very profound. Is that Mark?
Yep.
Yeah, that's Mark.
Is that photographer Mark?
Yes.
Oh, both Marks are photographers, Helga.
Oh my
so
wordy word. Sorry, I
it's
don't think
Mark T and not Mark L.
not Mark L. Hello, Mark L. I've only been exposed to Mark T's spectacular photography, but I'm sure at some stage I'll be exposed to yours. Yeah, Claire.
Just see a
So
couple of it from DDoc last at DUK last year. I took a lot of the shots of the symposium.
oh, okay, that's
I think
awesome.
they were only up
Are
on
they?
stories though on the DDoc
Oh, okay. I was
page.
just going to ask, are they up anyway?
So my Instagram, I think as well. There's one of Bastian and also of our Mary,
Yeah.
as in Mary Murphy,
Yes, yes, yes.
Murphy
Yeah.
and the team. And I'll try and find a few because they're on my phone because there's not many comments coming through.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark. Thanks very much.
So, Claire, as I was saying, so I think for us as women, and I don't know where you are in the the transitions that we go through hormonally, but and I see Azra's on the line here as well, listening in, but the menopause, childbirth, being pregnant and developing gestational diabetes, and then diagnosed then 5 years later, it dissipated after the gestational, and then 5 years later being diagnosed with type 2, and then having to contend with that, and then throwing into the pot perimenopause and then menopause. And again, it's very self-driven. These are not discussions that are being had enough. You self-educating all the time.
Yeah.
And I
Yep.
don't know, I don't know what your experience has been, but mine has certainly been down a rabbit hole initially. And it took me about a year to find some kind of equilibrium around my diabetes. And that's not insulin taking. And finding a safe space around getting my time in range back, dealing with emotional highs and lows, like all just an array of things that really does that symptoms that could be diabetes related or menopause related. So I think when you've got living with type 2 diabetes, I think there's so many additional factors that are so far out of your control, and you really need to, yeah, you either contract in to remain curious. It's a process of learning all the time, but not all of us are there. Some of us are still struggling with actually just living with living with diabetes, as opposed to living with diabetes and plus and plus and plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, when I was, shall we say, in the wilderness and struggling with my diabetes for, it was a long time, I didn't have access to quality information. And I had believed what the doctors had told me about it. It's only going to get worse. So I didn't necessarily look for the information. I could kick myself in hindsight, but there's no point. It was nice to see this repeated in a post today I saw on LinkedIn. No one chooses to have diabetes. All right. Nobody deliberately makes a decision and says, "Oh, I think I'll get diabetes now." So everybody is doing the best they can at the time with the information and the knowledge that and resources that they have at that point in their life. And there is no point in me going back and blaming myself for the decisions I made, because I was doing the best I could at that time. And in the middle of 2019, I quit a job that was very stressful. I had no idea what I was going to do for work or to earn money. At age 59, it was a scary concept, but I chose to prioritize my health over the money, and that paved the way for all the other changes I made. But blaming yourself for your condition is pointless. You did the best you could with the information you had and the life skills that you had. And, you know, if you're following exactly the same diet that your parents raised you on, is there any reason to suspect that it's going to cause you to get diabetes if it didn't cause them? Yeah. A big part of stigma is ignorance, and the solution to it is education. Educate yourself as best you can. There are, just be skeptical when you go online, but there are high quality sources of information available online, and find them and, you know, educate yourself.
Okay, thanks, Mark. That leads
Sorry.
nicely on to my next question. I've got 4 topics here, and the question is, how do you rank the importance of these? There's no right or wrong answer. And is there anything missing that you think should be included? So I've got education and awareness, peer support, treatments, tech access and equality, and addressing stigma. Ken, I'll come to you. Which do you think is more important, or do you think they're all equal?
All equal in equal amounts, I think, is probably about the best answer I can come up with. Peer support is, to me, paramount, because you get your 10 minutes or 20 minutes with your endocrinologist if you're lucky, or a GP if you're very lucky. You might see a nurse who probably doesn't know much about it, so it helps. And that was one of the reasons I started my peer support group, because there was no help around. And it's, by the way, it's no longer just type 2. It's I deal with all types because of that. Stigma, as Mark alludes to, is quite a big area that it's not only educating us, it's educating everybody else at the same time. And I think that is important. I just probably going off slightly adrift from that then, is when we were in Madrid the other month there, September, I think it was. I was listening to a young advocate from Indonesia, where they're actually reducing the government there are reducing the amount of money giving to diabetes, mainly because everybody thinks that by eating and exercising, you will cure your diabetes. That's why we need to stop the stigma, because these sort of things would happen. If it happens in one country, it could probably happen in a lot of other countries. So I'll stop there and go into the next one.
Helga,
Yeah.
the same question to you. Which do you think's more
Um,
important, or do you think that they're all equal as well?
Well, I don't know. I think yes, in terms of importance, they all have got importance and weighted importance. But I think that there is a intersectionality and a codependency in some or other regards in respect of all the areas you speak about, Claire, that, I think it's researched and it's accepted that community or surrounding the individual living with or being diagnosed with diabetes most certainly contributes and improves not only mental and emotional well-being, but also physical well-being for the individual. But that has a direct link to education as well. Like Ken was saying, uh, not only for you educating outwards, but for the individual being educated and information about those that are around them and support them as well. So I think that all these areas also have challenges. And I think when one is speaking about low resourced countries, in respect of, for instance, accessibility to the education, accessibility to the communication, or to the community, and accessibility to those 4 pillars, it becomes more and more of a challenge. And so if we particularly focus on type 2 diabetes as an example in the South African context, cultural diversity is something that plays a large role. Obviously, nutrition and scarcity, and I think, was it Mark that mentioned something like the diet that you said, the diet that our parents raised us on. It's not only the diet that our parents raised us on, but it's also what is culturally, what we eat, and what is acceptable in terms of our diet culturally, but then also what's accessible to us in terms of that, and what's okay, or what is perceived as being okay. So I think that there's an integrated, oh yeah, I use the word codependence, but that might have a negative connotation. But there's an integratedness in terms of, we can't, it's a duality, so we can't look at one of these pillars. We almost have to look at them universally in terms of how each of them influence one another. But I think for me, above that is around, so in order to break that barrier going forward in terms of this accessibility, what does that actually look like? Because I think for me, certainly here in South Africa, I mean, I'm still sitting, you know, Ken and Mark and a couple of other of us living with type 2, we've started, you know, a very, very brief preparatory process. When we were in Spain together, we started having discussions around how do we become cohesive in our efforts around supporting, not only locally within our own communities and our own countries, but how do we organize globally for us to be able to then be able to address all these areas, Claire, in a cohesive way between ourselves, and to be able to expand the community for us to garner and gain support in order to then start developing fundamental education programs and using, you know, the grassroots programs that do exist, and that we are exposed to, and learning from how amazingly our type 1 colleagues have actually been able to collaborate, to be able to launch programs, etc. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Helga. Mark, have you got anything to add?
Not really. I think Ken and Helga have both covered it pretty well. Yes, I would rate them all as equally important, and important also in different aspects. Stigma is so pervasive around type 2 that it prevents a lot of type 2s making progress with their management. And, you know, I had this discussion with Ken 18 months ago. Type 2s, as a general rule, do not want to talk about their condition. We are an absolute rarity. Even as DDoC voices, I would guess that type 1 advocates outnumber the type 2s probably 4 or 5 to 1, if not more. And education is important. One of the things that I want to do is create a website entitled "It's Not Your Fault," and it will talk about type 2, and I want to provide education resources on there. Helga, I take your point that a lot of people won't have access necessarily to the resources, and I also realize that a lot of the stuff I put up is going to have to be culturally sensitive and probably have different things for different audiences. But we got to start somewhere. I would also like to see public information campaigns implemented by the various governments, but they've got to believe in it. Stigma is such a huge issue. I had a conversation last year with another advocate, not from the UK, who was sitting in a meeting discussing access to CGM, and the main discussion was around type 1. And so the question was raised, what about type 2s? And the doctors in the room just looked at her and said, they don't deserve it. And yeah, that's what we're facing. Not
And
only
that's
from...
terrible, really, isn't it?
It is. But yeah, like I say, it wasn't in the UK, and I won't say where it was, but that is what we face, and that is the battle we need to fight. And we can't... you have 4 type 2s here. We need more voices.
Definitely. I mean, one of my other sub-questions was education for ourselves. Have any of you done any structured education sessions, like the Daphne course or the Bertie course?
No. I mean, I migrated to the UK already having diabetes, so I didn't get any of the initial, shall we say, induction into living with diabetes that they provide in the UK.
Okay. What about you, Ken? Have you had any structured education?
Apart from how to stab an orange, no. That's about all I had. Yeah, I came from Edinburgh, actually, before I came down to Bromley. So I'm from the East Coast rather than the West Coast. We didn't have in '99 Desmond or even Daphne, I don't think, at that time. These are relatively new things. What I think is missing, and Claire, you can probably say the same thing, is that when people go from medication to insulin, there is no course or anything to help them through that for people with type 2,
No,
which I find absolutely disgraceful.
but there wasn't any. And I know at one stage my diabetes nurse actually tried to get them to take me onto the Daphne course because I was really struggling. But because I was diagnosed as type 2, they wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
But I've recently, well, I finished on Friday a pilot scheme with my local hospital on the Victor course, which is the same as Daphne, but for type 2s, which they're trying to get implemented for everybody that's on insulin that's a type 2 diabetic. So hopefully that will be circulated round to all the health trusts, because it was really interesting. I learnt a lot, and over the course of the 5 weeks I actually managed to reduce my insulin intake to under 100 units, and I was regularly on 120, 130 units a day.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I I was at I was part of what's called the Patient Advisory Committee for Hypo Resolve. I don't know if you've seen that trial they finished last year, where Simon Heller, who actually developed the Daphne course, said to me 2 years ago now, 18 months ago rather, that they were in the process of actually having a type 2 course, and it was going to come out later that year. So either you've developed it before him, or he's just forgotten all about it. I don't know. So,
it's been developed by Daphne. So,
right. So it's probably
Um,
part of his, because he developed Daphne.
So, and I
Yep.
think it's a week, no, 4 weeks tonight. So I think it's the 17th of March. We are actually having a chat on the Victor course with Liesl, who was on last year for the Daphne course.
Okay.
So just giving you all advance notice.
Sounds-
Helga, as somebody that's living in South Africa, have you had any structured education?
The answer would be no to that question. The simple answer would be no. I think in terms of, education, a lot of it has been because I access private healthcare and I've got medical insurance, which puts me in a very privileged position. So I've got access to an endocrinologist and a specialist GP and a diabetes center that I attend. And so there's education there, but not formalized education. So there isn't which I assume are programs, state-run programs, the Daphne program, etc. We don't have specific programs, particularly where there is content that is being whipped out and shared once you are diagnosed. And I think everything from things like and I'm talking from a type 2 non insulin taking individual, that individual's diagnosed, and these are people that have perhaps been deferred to me over time who end up having hypos because they're not taking their medication appropriately at the correct time, because they don't understand what the medication is there to do. And so when you're not taking your medication regime in the way it's been explained to you, you run the risk of either being hyper or hypo, more so hypo. And so by the time someone realizes that, they've already experienced a hypo, perhaps collapse, perhaps, haven't responded really well to their medication. And that then compounds, not having the education, then compounds them taking the medication and has an impact on them emotionally. So it becomes this vicious circle that happens. And I think that if there were compulsory programs at diagnosis, that and I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't be sort of preventative programs and intervention, because there are, but I think at diagnosis there should be programs that speak to what if I'm giving you metformin or glucophage or any of these medications, what actually are they there to do for you, and how does it interact with your body, and happens when you're not eating a meal before you're taking your medication, or what happens if you don't take it in the morning or the evening, and what are the consequences of it. So really, I think 101 education is required, and sort of packs. And then there's also health practitioner education as well. Because although there are endocrinologists and specialists, etc., a lot of the time the GP is prescribing medication at the end of the day. And so I think that, it's everything from bedside manner when someone is diagnosed. And I almost think being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and I might be shot down for this, but it's almost not treated as seriously as if I was diagnosing you with something else, with any other NCD, etc. That, oh, you've got type 2 diabetes, here's the pamphlet for here's the pamphlet for that. These are the medications, etc., and off you go. I think mine was different because I had gestational diabetes. You're pregnant, there's a bit more attention on it. But no, the short answer is no, there isn't formalized educational programs for at diagnosis to be able to go through the process. And I'm not saying there isn't content and material available, but there aren't compulsory programs that one can go to and attend, in terms of saying, I have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. What is life like for you now? What does this mean for you? How is your medication? How do I manage a medication regime? How do I actually understand what my body's going through? How do I know that my body is experiencing a hypo? Like, what are the signs? So it's, and the questions go on and on and on. Yes, and so again, you have to say that if you are in private healthcare, the experience would be somewhat different than if you're in the public healthcare system, where where there are less resources, where there's less time to be able to spend. So those 5-10 minutes that Ken referred to, I think it was, you know, literally a patient or someone being diagnosed can wait the entire day in a waiting room to be seen and just literally be spending 5 minutes and then spend another a few hours in a queue to get to the pharmacy in the hospital to get the medication, and then being explained but still in shock because they've got their diagnosis and they don't actually even understand what it means to have type 2 diabetes. So there are many challenges.
It definitely is. And I mean, even over here, when I was diagnosed, I wasn't a healthcare professional then. I went to uni late, but nothing was explained to me about what type 2 diabetes was and what the complications were that you might get, you might not get. So, and that brings me on to my next question. Can you give one top tip for what you would say to somebody who is newly diagnosed with type 2? And what would your advice to them be? Mark, do you want to go first this time?
Educate yourself about your condition would be the first thing. Second of all, it's a condition. It's not a sentence. And what you do can make a difference. There are some people who can go into remission, complete remission, but they will probably have to change their lifestyle to do it. I'm not saying it is caused by lifestyle, and that would be my biggest tip. It's not caused by lifestyle. There is a whole heap of other things that influence it. The biggest one being genetic predisposition. But it's not the end of the world. And know that there are people out there you can talk to, and you're not the only person going through this.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Ken, what tip would you give to somebody who's newly diagnosed?
Don't give up, basically. No. What would I do? As Mark says, it is a condition. We have to live with it. It's not. If you make it onerous, it will be onerous. So educate yourself, as Mark says. Learn more. Join a peer support group to help you understand how other people are coping with their diabetes or managing. But we're all different.
Yep.
Everyone's diabetes is different. It doesn't matter what type you are. So what might work for you might not work for somebody else. In other words, if you have a spike eating one type of food, somebody else might not. So you just don't know. And I think the biggest thing I would say is when you're going to see your GP or your nurse, advocate for yourself. And the best way, and one of the best ways I've heard from that, and I still do it to this day, is write everything down that you want to chat about, because you've only got a short time to talk about it.
On that, Ken, there are forms online that can guide you through that.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about yourself, about your
I
own.
know,
But it's I don't like forms. I just talk
fair
about
enough.
myself. But yeah, because I mean, I have got so many other conditions as well that I have to talk about it in that 5 to 10 minutes, which is a bit silly sometimes. Okay.
Thank you for that, Ken. Helga, have you got any tips that you would give to somebody?
I totally agree with Mark and Ken, but I think that, you know, just from the lived experience and you know, from my experience engaging with other people, individuals being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, is that I think to me it's three things. And one, it's in terms of, you know, understanding, because when someone's diagnosed, um, they are in a suspension of I think disbelief. I think it's about acceptance. I think there's an a large emotional and psychological aspect at diagnosis that actually is a very big predeterminant in terms of how the person actually approaches and navigates their journey. So the first thing is to be gentle. That's always important, that be gentle with yourself, because it's not your fault, it's not self-inflicted. And I think the second thing is around find peer support and community as soon as possible, even before the information and the knowledge, etc. Find an environment that where it is normalized, where this is not something that sits on the peripheral, where individuals are there to be able to share their experience, etc. That made a remarkable difference to me, because it always felt like this, you always feel like this outlier sitting on the peripheral. And I think if I joined community way back in 2006 with other pregnant mummies that were experiencing gestational diabetes at the time, I perhaps would have approached it very differently. And then I think that the last thing is that which Ken emphasized, was about knowing that I can advocate for myself, that I do not have to just sit there and basically be told, like, you know, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. But I think that it's about taking that 5 or 10 minutes, etc., and being able to advocate and write down everything. So I agree with Ken. Our system, Mark, we don't really have forms that we can pre-complete before consultation, because the system is just not set up that way. Neither the public system. And so I think it's really about pen and paper and going in and saying, this is what's happened to me this week. This is what I'm concerned about. You know, this is what I'd eaten this week, but this is how my body was feeling. And so I think that's really fundamental advice, understanding that nobody told me in the beginning, you can go there and have a discussion about your condition. It's your body. This is what you're experiencing, and sharing that with your health practitioner at the end of the day. So, but to me, it really comes back. I would not have known all these things if I had not actually been part of a community and started the process of really becoming curious. And I think the last thing is really about start listening to your body, because your body keeps score, right? And I think if you silence yourself and everything else that goes around of it, your body actually tells you where it is and tells you what's going on in it. And so going to a health practitioner, you can then better articulate yourself what's happening. So yeah, many things, Claire, but I think all equally important.
Thank you for that, Helga. And I think that my top tip would be talk to people, because a problem shared is a problem halved.
Absolutely.
Totally agree.
I mean, I've said before, I didn't have any support at all till I joined Diabetes Chat. And that was like 2 years ago. So I'd had 28 years of trying to live with my diabetes and not let it control me. And it's done wonders for me. I mean, 2 years ago, you wouldn't have had me hosting a chat like this on diabetes tonight. So we've touched on a lot on stigma tonight. I just wanted to ask now, what do you believe to be the role of the community, media, healthcare professional, friends, families, and colleagues to reduce the diabetes stigma? Helga, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, I think, the movement around language matters um, globally has really highlighted the way we articulate living with diabetes. And it speaks about all those areas you spoke about initially around the education, Claire, etc. That, you know, as in our communities and our families, and when you diagnose, where do you go first? When you leave the doctor's surgery, you're going home. And so I think that there needs to be a greater emphasis on the support structure that exists for the individual at diagnosis. And so I think it's important that a health practitioner says, would you have to support you? you know this is what you need to be sharing with them, because the language that we use, I think, impacts on everything. I mean, I always relay the story, and I've spoken about it, being a diagnosis, being referred to as a geriatric morbidly obese type 2 diabetic. That is startling. And so I think there is a responsibility, firstly, with the health practitioners to find the other language, how we speak about being diagnosed and what is considered acceptable. And yeah, I think it's very weighty around, what should media and branding and marketing be doing. I think it's, again, more publicly being able to share guidelines and charters that requires a lot of advocacy, like Mark was saying initially, those conversations with our wards and our politicians in our local boroughs in areas. Well, we don't have boroughs here in South Africa. Your cities and your units and your suburbs, in terms of saying, we want to start raising it. And I think we need to then be taking around interventions that have taken and campaigns that have taken place that have become successful, in terms of being able to start with, again, the communication that happens, because I think it is so impactful. And words matter, how we communicate matters. And I think we underestimate the psychological impact it has, that the messaging has, whether that's within our family, whether it's within our ecosystems, our social or professional ecosystems, or whether that's with the media, etc.
I totally agree with you there, Helga. An example I have for that is that I went to have a dressing changed at my doctor's surgery a couple of months ago, and it was
Yes.
a totally new healthcare professional that I'd not seen before. And the first thing she said to me was, "Are you a bad diabetic?"
Are you a bad diabetic?
Yeah, and I said, "There's no such thing as a bad diabetic. We do the best that we can every day." So that was my example, and I came out actually feeling absolutely awful from that appointment.
I'm not surprised.
So I think I did have a rant on Twitter about it, actually. But let's just say it was taken further and she was reprimanded. Don't know, out of Ken and Mark, who wants to go next?
Yeah, I'll go next then. Mark's been very quiet there for a change. Sorry. Yeah, I totally agree. The psychological effect on people, as you said, I'm a psychotherapist. I find it interesting that healthcare professionals, as you just reiterated there, Claire, saying you're a bad diabetic. Yours going around saying, no, I'm not, but somebody has already said that, so you're automatically in that stress, depressive mood. And guess what? That usually happens is your blood sugars go up. So people have to be mindful of, Helga was saying, language matters in a big way. So I find the media is probably one of the biggest, and I'm talking about social media as well as the papers and things, are the biggest culprits going. You often see, oh, diabetes is cured, or all you have to do is diet and exercise and you're cured. Nobody's cured of diabetes yet. They haven't found a cure for it, I'm afraid. And it doesn't matter what type. So the other thing that irks me more than anything else, I don't get annoyed these days. I'm too old. I'm the geriatric one that I think Helga was talking about. I've forgotten the thread there. So for a second, it's when people talk about diabetes, and I say it often, especially in social media, they're only talking about type 1. They very rarely talk about diabetes as a whole. And remember, there are something like 12 different types of diabetes in the world. So, or if it is type 2, it's about the diet and exercise. So we need to change that thinking, as I was reiterated earlier, about the Indonesian people that diet and exercise cures diabetes. If we don't change narratives, if we don't advocate, we don't educate people, then we are not going to get any help. It was interesting. There was an article I saw that something like this: 10 million pounds or whatever billion pounds is being spent on dogs' health, and only 11 million on diabetes. I think who came out with this, or no, the IDF came out with, there are now 800 million people with diabetes in the world.
And it's only going to get worse, isn't it?
It is indeed. And 90% of that is type 2. And as Mark alluded earlier about people, type 2, not raising their heads above the parapet, as I call it, I liken it into the sense that type 2 diabetes is the silenced majority, because anytime we say anything, we're told, oh, you can cure it yourself, you can reverse it, it's your fault, your lifestyle. And that is actually coming from healthcare professionals in a big way. And not all of them, I know clarity, otherwise you'll thump me on that. But there are too many people, too many healthcare professionals like that. And that needs to stop, in my view.
It really does.
And if it can affect you as a healthcare professional, how do you think with somebody that is not a healthcare professional going to feel like? It's that sort of area that we really need to educate people with. And I mean, I'm on various boards and everything else here in Southeast London, and I'm often asked what about this, that, and the next thing, and everybody listens to reply, never listens to understand. And I think that is where the biggest problem lies in the medical profession. And I'll stop ranting. I've been on my soapbox.
That's my job.
Well, thank you for that, Ken. I'm conscious of the time. Is everybody okay for another 10-15 minutes?
Claire, it's 11:30 for me, and I'm keeping my eyes open with toothpicks, and I still have work to go and do. So I am going to, if it's okay. I really appreciate being invited onto the platform to come and chat, and I hope I get invited back again.
Well, I
'Cause I think
the plan
there's-
is to do another type 2 evening later on in the year, because we haven't covered half of the questions I've got to ask.
Yeah. And I think it's, it's our responsibility and our job, Ken and Mark, that we actually leverage and spread the word more and encourage. I mean, I wish I had invited more people one-on-one who I know that are living with type 2 diabetes, and the platforms. There's a WhatsApp group as part of a bigger advocacy group with type 2 people living with type 2 diabetes. But interestingly enough, on the WhatsApp group of 300 and odd people, many people just don't feel that they've got a voice. So they're conscious observers, but they don't participate even when invited to do so. And it's such a phenomenon for me.
Well, I definitely think we need to all try and get together and raise our voices and get noticed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before
For all the
Helga
right,
goes,
for
Mark,
all
have
the
you got
right
any-
reasons, yeah. For all the right reasons, Claire.
Mark, before Helga goes, have you got anything that you want to say?
Who? I'll say
Um,
good night. I'll say good night to Helga.
Good night, Helga. Sleep well.
Baba, my favorite people. Baba, my
Yeah.
favorite people.
Okay. Oh, you make
Thank
us.
you so much.
Thanks for coming, Helga. It's been a
It's
wonderful
a
evening, and
pleasure.
we'll definitely do another one later in the year.
That would be awesome. Take care, everybody. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
So, where were we?
I think I was about to talk.
Okay then.
Ken, I wanted to pick up on something you said about they haven't found a cure for diabetes, and you're absolutely right. I had a conversation a couple of weeks back with a diabetes specialist nurse, and I told her what my HbA1c was, and she said, "Oh, you don't have diabetes." And I didn't say anything at the time, but I thought, yes, I do. I'm fine. I have my HbA1c is below 48, but I'm still taking insulin and other drugs and everything else related to diabetes. And I may never be in remission, not completely. I've well managed, but I still have diabetes, and that's one of the things that wears. I know that I spoke to Partha Carr, who, for the type 2s you don't know, Partha is the national lead on type 1 diabetes and diabetes technology for the NHS, and he's done a fantastic job in getting better access to technology for type 1s. And I spoke to him and I said, what do we have to do to replicate your success with type 1 with type 2? And he says, you have to get the conversation into the public sphere. And to do that, you've got to stop stigma. You have to get the type 2s talking about it, and they won't while there's so much stigma. And he's absolutely right. There are a few things on TV that there's a show on one of the channels. It's either ITV4 or Channel 4 called The Glucose Goddess, and this is a medical professional working with people and providing good quality information on type 2 and reducing the effect it has on you. And we need more of it. I mean, look, when I first started using self-funding a CGM sensor, Libre in my case, I went online and almost everybody I spoke to was a type 1. And on more than one occasion, I got the comment, "Oh, you've got type 2, you have it easy." And it hurt, because I assure you it ain't easy.
Definitely
That
isn't.
Yeah. I mean, Ken, there was that post that came up on LinkedIn today. All diabetes is hard. And it's absolutely right. And for me, having somebody else with diabetes tell me I had it easy was painful. Yeah. So we have to educate people. You know, it happens to me. I won't say all the time, but you know, there have been many times in the past when I'll go out to lunch with work colleagues, and you know, you get the standard comment, "Should you be eating that?"
I've had that before as well.
Yeah. Just yeah, I think we all have. And I make a conscious decision. Ken, if you've got your psychiatrist hat on, I'm reframing. I'm choosing to look at the intention behind what they're saying. They're not trying to hurt you. They are trying to help, and they don't know, and they're asking a question. And so if someone's asking me a question, I give them an answer and I educate them. And I explain why, yes, I can eat that. And I could choose to be insulted, or I could choose to educate someone. As I said last year at something that Ken and I were both at, an insult hurts only if you accept it. And if you choose to see that someone has a positive intention by what they've said, and that they're really trying to show that they care, then take their comment in that spirit.
Definitely. Well, I've got one last question, and then I think we'll finish for tonight, and we'll do another chat later in the year. So my last question is, what is the role of the government for changing policy change and funding? What are your thoughts on it? Ken?
Give us more money. Yeah. Policy change. I think. I don't know. I should know because being on various committees and things. We need to have a better understanding of how diabetes, especially in NHS England, is actually looked after or supported. Coming from Scotland, where I had an endocrinologist, a dietitian, a podiatrist, etc., on hand, and I could just book an appointment. To coming down to the lovely Bromley area and being told by my new GP that she was going to look after it, and then she disappeared. And there was nobody left in the surgery to look after it. We need to rethink the way of how type 2 diabetes is supported and looked after in the community. I think is my way of thinking. I have various thoughts on that, and I'm not going to bore everybody's thoughts on that tonight. But it's because it's not being, in my mind, being addressed properly. I'll give you an example of why, in a sense, two things why I think it's true is for two reasons. One being why type 2s are quiet as well, is that when you're first diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and this happens, and it's still happening because I hear it from my own peer support group, is the GP, if you're lucky, will give you a prescription to go away for your metformin, a diet sheet, and an exercise sheet, and say, I'll see you in a year's time. So the person psychologically thinks, oh, I'm cured. Why? Because when you go to see a GP, let's say a sore throat or something, and he gives you a prescription and says, I'll come back in 2 weeks if it's not cured, then you try it. You just take the pill and go away. And you think, I don't have to worry about my diabetes until something happens. And that's when it's too late. So I think I've slightly gone off the subject, but it stops people from doing anything. They don't know about anything else. So it's the education that's really required, in my view, and as I also say, a new way of looking at how type 2 is supported in the community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, going back to when I was first diagnosed, when they were trying me just on diet, I asked what I could eat and what I couldn't eat, and all I was told was, don't eat too much sugar.
Yep.
Which we now know isn't all of it, shall we say?
Yep.
So,
Yes.
but yeah, I totally agree that type 2 diabetes needs to be supported better than it is at the moment. And like we've been saying all night, education and getting our voices heard is very important.
Yep. Yep.
Mark, have you got anything to add to that?
I would like to see, and this is one of the things I advocate for, is government run or changing government policy. Yes, to get more funding, education for better education for NHS staff, particularly around type 2. I mean, at my local surgery, I get to see a nurse once a year. That's it. Don't even see a GP. And this is not a diabetes specialist nurse. It's just a nurse who looks after the type 2s on their books. And that's it. At the back end of 2019, I went and saw her having just had a set of blood tests, and my A1C was 74. And she gave me the same tired advice, diet and exercise. I didn't even get a sheet about it. Got no support on how to do that, no support on what to eat. And I asked about CGM, and she said as a type 2, I wasn't entitled to it on the NHS and it wouldn't help me anyway. And unlike in 1996, when I was diagnosed, I didn't believe her. So I went and started funding the Freestyle Libre system myself. And I put on my first sensor on the 5th of December. And by the middle of February, I had my A1C at 49. I got it under control. No, I got it better managed. Language matters. A type 2 diabetic, by definition, does not have control of their sugar levels, by definition. But what we can do is manage it. So CGM access would be a huge benefit to type 2s. And there are plenty of studies out there now that says that CGM helps type 2s. But also public information and education campaigns around diabetes, about the different types of diabetes, even if they only really talk about type 1 and type 2. Between those two, they're talking, Ken, I don't know the exact figures, between type 1 and 2, that would be 95%.
I think we've lost Ken. I think he's lost signal or something.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's about
Yeah,
right.
well, that and maybe gestational diabetes. Oh, one of the things I found out recently, at EASD last year, is outcome for gestational diabetes for type 1s in the UK is improving, and they're getting worse for type 2s with gestational diabetes. And that horrifies me.
It does.
So public information on the causes and of diabetes and things that will help would be great. That Glucose Goddess show I mentioned on TV is excellent, and she's doing some of that work already. So that's useful. But fund it better, educate the NHS staff properly, and provide joined up care. I mean,
Yeah.
consider all the comorbidities as well. I mean, there's the trinity of heart disease, obesity, and diabetes, and they all go together and they're treated separately.
Yeah.
Patient-centric care has been trialled in the UK and gotten good results, where the various specialties get together and they talk about their patient together. You do that,
Yeah.
and the quality of care is can't help but improve. Yeah, I've gotten on my soapbox again.
Never mind. It's been an absolutely fantastic evening, and I just want to thank you, Ken and Helga, for coming on and sharing your experiences. And I look forward to seeing you both next week in Glasgow.
You will, and I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yeah. You can give us a cup of coffee each.